Edward Knurk, and I'm president of Futura RGV. And I want to welcome all of our candidates, our moderator, Jim Darling, and our League of Women Voters person, Edward Yao, and all of you people out there who are watching on Facebook or FaceTime, and who will be watching later, as this is going to be broadcast up until Election Day. And Futura RGV hosts these candidate forums as part of our mission to provide information and education to our community regarding events, elections, and issues that are important to the RGV. And certainly good government is very important to all of us. Therefore, our candidates are very important to all of us. So this, excuse me, this forum will be broadcast until Election Day. So I want to thank our board members, our advisors, of which Jim Darling is one, and our sponsors. And our sponsors, I will thank them: AT&T, Sam Garcia Architect, Rhodes Enterprise, Clark Chevrolet, Valley Land Title, Frost Bank, IBC Bank, DHR Health, Rio Bank, L&F Distributors, Ernie Williams, and our in-kind sponsors, Copy Zone, Upper Valley Mail Service, and CSL Productions, of which Milo Rodriguez, who is our techie person here, who's making all this happen, is recording the forum. So we also want to give special thanks to AIM Media. AIM Media Partners, which is Stephen Wingert, and they own the Monitor and the Brownsville Herald, and we thank them for sharing their technical expertise and their facilities for us. So one of our partners, of course, is League of Women Voters, and we're very fortunate to have Edward Yao, who is co-president of League of Women Voters, RGV, and he has some very important information for you, the voters. So Edward, can you tell them about Vote for 11?
Thank you, Nedra. My name is Edward Yao, and I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters, Rio Grande Valley. I'm here to advertise vote411.org. It is a nonpartisan voters guide to give voters information and candidate information for local voters in the area. Again, it's vote411.org. You will see candidates' information and survey information that allows you to differentiate which candidates best suit your values. Again, it's vote411.org. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Edward. And the important thing for you voters out there, be an informed voter. Find out about these candidates and then go vote. It doesn't do any good unless you vote. So I want to introduce our moderator, Jim Darling. And Jim Darling will introduce the candidates in ballot order and do the questioning. So Jim.
Well, thank you. And the candidates for District 28, Congressional District, are Henry Cuellar, who will not be with us tonight, Tanya Benavides, and Jessica Cisneros. And they're on the ballot in that order. And welcome, ladies. We appreciate you participating tonight. The rules are we'll be alternating on questions. Who goes first? The first one will be based on the ballot. Tanya will be the first question after we do the initial questions. And then we'll alternate from there. You have a minute to answer the questions. It's not a lot of time, but I'm sure that you'll do fine on it. Take a deep breath and relax. And this next 50 minutes is going to fly by, believe me. So you want to go forward now and with the opening questions. And at the end, when we finish, you'll also be given a minute without questions to summarize your positions. Any questions? Great. Okay, do you want me to read the first question, Nedra? Or did I know it?
Well, for the audience.
Yeah. Besides the people in our District 28, what do you see as our single biggest asset and our single greatest concern? And would you please address that concern when you do so? Okay, first one to go up is Tanya. Go ahead.
Buenas tardes a todos. Me llamo Tanya Benavides. I am an educator, a first-generation American, and a community organizer. I was born in Brownsville and raised in Laredo, Texas, since I was 5 years old. As a working-class Latina, I have borne witness to the hardships that our community possesses as barriers, and I'm running for Congress because it's time for a leader that can turn those policies into bold, practical, common sense solutions that put our people first. I intend to deliver on these solutions and serve for 8 years maximum before I return to my community to teach and to organize. And my vision for Texas 28 is brave because I believe that our most greatest asset is the geographical diversity of our district. We have a border community that is large and thriving. We have rural communities. We have metropolitan areas. And this vast land that we have been given in our district is an opportunity for us to create a thriving economy, but it is not treated as such right now. So my concern is actually around the cost of living and inflation and how we are not addressing that by hiring wages. I want to make sure that we push for higher wages in Congress, but also I would push for an index of cost of living so that we are able to keep up with the rising costs of living and inflation and not finding ourselves every 10 to 12 years having to fight for higher wages again. Thank you.
Now, Jessica, can you repeat the question? If not, then go right ahead.
No, I think I'm good. Thank you all so much for this opportunity, and thank you for hosting these forums, not just for this race, but for so many, because I think it's really important. So I just wanted to preface with that. My name is Jessica Cisneros. I am an immigration human rights attorney running again in the Texas 28th Congressional District for the Democratic nomination. You might remember me from last time around when we had a bigger part of the RGB. But I'm still really excited to be able to advocate on behalf of those folks on the border as well. I think our single biggest, greatest asset are our values of hard work and familia in this area of the country. And I think the greatest concern right now, a reason why I decided to run, is that no matter how much hard work we put in for our families to try to provide for them, there's not a lot of opportunity and investment in our community to try to help make that happen. So we're trying to change that by running on bold policy that meets the challenges and struggles that families in our district face every day and have been facing for decades. Last cycle, we were able to earn 48.2% of the vote, running on these bold policies, running on Medicare for all so that we can have healthcare for all of our loved ones in our community, running on increasing the minimum wage to $15 per hour, and on diversifying the workforce so that we don't have to leave the border in search of opportunity elsewhere. So we're excited to finish the race that we started last time and hope we can count on your support on March 1st. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll go into the questions. And the first question we have, Tanya will answer it, is what, first place, what do you believe are the 3 biggest issues facing our country today? And why did you select these issues? Tanya?
First and foremost, I believe that healthcare possesses a real challenge in our communities, but honestly, just nationwide, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, the failures of our system have been sort of on this platform worldwide for everyone to see. Secondly, I do believe that not to beat a dead horse, but the economy and inflation is something that is really prevalent in all of our communities right now. When you go to HEB, you see how much more expensive the cost of eggs and milk are, and we need to address these issues head on. One way to do that is, again, by increasing wages. And thirdly, I do think that the last issue that I would say perhaps is the most prevalent, just not for Texas 28, but in general, is how we need to address the climate crisis. And that in a few years, we're going to be finding ourselves in a situation that is not reversible anymore. So we need to address that now so that we can safeguard our future generations.
Okay. And Jessica, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, I think I'm fine.
Okay.
I think I absolutely agree in terms of healthcare and good paying jobs. I think the lack of those two are issues that you see not just in our district, and no matter where you are in the district, whether that be San Antonio, whether that be La Grulla, whether that be Laredo, those two things are coming up a lot. So obviously in terms of addressing them, I just mentioned that we are for Medicare for all, so that we can all get the healthcare coverage that we deserve, and also having $15 minimum wage union jobs for folks, not just in our district, but across the country. I think the third issue across the country that I think we see, especially in areas like the RGV, is that there's so many communities that are being taken for granted and neglected. I think that the kind of campaign that we're running on, one that's putting forth the effort to meet voters where they're at and getting them involved and making them feel heard, is something that I'm going to be doing not just throughout this campaign, but during my time in office as well.
Okay, thank you. The next questions deal with immigration reform. We're always hearing that businesses or particular industries can't find people to fill jobs, especially during this pandemic. So the first question is, and this is for Jessica, go first, would you support passing immigration reform that can, at a minimum, allow the issuance of work visas for seasonal workers or for workers when there's a shortage in the US?
Absolutely. And of course, I wouldn't stop there. I mean, making sure that we have an immigration system that works for everyone, since there are so many folks that come to this country, like my parents, like so many people throughout the district, people just looking for safety and opportunity. They're not asking for handouts, they're asking for a chance to be able to thrive in this country and have a shot at the American dream, like so many of our ancestors or parents or grandparents came and to try to do that. I obviously count with the unique background of being an immigration attorney. So I very much look forward to using my background, both professional and personal experience of being an immigration attorney born and raised on the border, to address a lot of these issues and bring in forth the expertise that we need, especially as a border district, to address what's going on with our immigration system as it currently stands.
Okay. Tanya, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, no, and my answer is yes. I wholeheartedly would support the utilization of visas in order for us to be able to fill in gaps in our workforce. We see this especially here in Texas 28, again, going back to the rural communities. This would be an opportunity for agribusiness. I was just out in Poteet last week, and the strawberry growers, this is a concern that they have, and the Strawberry Festival is coming up real soon. So we did talk about, this is an issue where I think folks both on the Democratic and the Republican side can agree that when we process HB1 and HB2 visas that are temporary, that we can fill in these gaps in our workforce and make sure that when we walk into the grocery store, we have all the fruits and vegetables that we would expect to see there. I think in addition to that, however, what I would also enforce or really make a push for is the protections for farm workers and for temporary and seasonal workers, and that they have a workplace where they are not being mistreated, where they're being paid fairly, and where they have protections.
Okay, good. Then the next question relating to immigration, and Tanya, you go up first. Would you support passing legislation to give dreamers who are already in our country and have been here for many years a path to citizenship?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that what we've done with Dreamers in this country has really just demonstrated the little lack of regard that we sometimes have for people's just mental health and well-being. The way that we have been sort of pawning the DREAM Act, if you will, through different presidencies and different election cycles has been really sad to see. And I have friends that would fall under this category, that are afraid to make plans for their future because they don't know what is going to happen next. Now, I will say though that the lack of addressing, right, what happens to the parents of those dreamers is also something that we would have to look at in as part of this comprehensive immigration reform. But when it comes to dreamers, right, let's stop playing games. Let's just put a solution on the table and make sure that we can move forward so that they can continue to be a part of our economy and build their future.
Thank you. Jessica.
Yes, I mean, for me, especially as someone who, recognizes the fact that I was never undocumented, my parents were, but I never was not. It's really important for me to be able to talk and discuss this with folks that would fall, as beneficiaries of the DREAM Act, because there's a lot of people that say, the DREAM Act doesn't go far enough in terms of not having protections for their parents. So, I mean, it would be something for me to discuss if that's what they want me to do, since we are trying to negotiate the best possible solution for people in our district. So I would center them first, but something that I feel like I can bring forth to the table is the fact that I already know so many things that the executive branch can do to provide a pathway to citizenship, not just for dreamers, but for parents of dreamers as well. For example, expanding who is eligible for waivers at the moment of petitioning. So for me, again, I just very much look forward to bringing in that professional experience and be able to call out things that we can already do today that we don't have to pawn or kick down the road in terms of talking about politics.
Okay, and now Jessica, you're gonna answer this question. Speaking of bipartisanship, we all know that Congress has become much more partisan in recent years, so much so that the general public has lost confidence in Congress getting much done. So what will you do to work with both sides of the aisle if elected to Congress?
That one's a really easy one, because I think one of the first things that I would absolutely push forth at the moment that I step on Capitol Hill is express my support for the bipartisan piece of legislation known as the PRO Act, which is Protect the Right to Organize Act. This would allow folks to be able to organize in their workforce, in their workspaces, and also provide other kinds of labor protections that are desperately needed for working class people here. Unfortunately, the incumbent was the only Democrat to not vote for this bipartisan piece of legislation in the House. So for me, that would be such an easy one, is to make sure that we're working across the aisle to ensure that we get the PRO Act passed.
Okay. Tanya, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I believe that bipartisanship and having a clear line of communication across both sides can really, in a perfect world, lead to many positive changes for a community. I believe that when we just talk to each other, we find that there's probably a lot more that we agree on than we disagree on, because we all want thriving economies and communities. We all want to safeguard our communities and the places where we work and live. I have worked with people across the aisle and people that I don't wholeheartedly agree with, for example, in spaces and in fights, such as the one against the border wall. Here in Laredo, I know people are surprised by hearing this, but we had people on the Republican side that were against the border wall, and we decided to come together and really work on those issues that we do agree with, right? We agreed that we wanted to reject that idea that our communities deserved more, and that throwing away billions of taxpayer dollars to a complex solution was not going to be the case. So I have a proven record of working bipartisanly, and we'll be happy to do that in Congress as well.
Okay. The next question has to do with border security. And I might make a comment here. You represent, your district goes about 240, 250 miles north and represent both the border and upstate. And so you might be interesting to see what your answers are on these questions. Because we live on the border, not necessarily our districts are, we are more aware of what really is happening here versus how it's sometimes portrayed in the media. So the first question, Tanya, is what is your opinion of the state of our US-Mexican border? Are we safe?
Jim, that's a really funny question. And I'm very aware of how the district has been spending. I have put nearly 4,000 miles in my car just driving up and down the district from November 15th when the lines got redrawn. And actually, this question is the first question that I had been asked all through last week, spending time in some of these rural communities again, right? What do you think about the border? And it's almost like, what about the border? But we are some of the safest communities per the FBI data. We need to be able to discern what is the perception of our communities in the media, and when they are talking about us versus when they are talking to us, right? And don't get me wrong, I don't want to discredit maybe the feelings of overwhelmedness that some of the men and women that work for CBP, that work in BP are feeling, right? And that there may be ways that we can help alleviate their situations, but the border is not this war-torn place that people have in their heads. That is just an idea that we need to reject. We can walk down to the river and have this interview right there, right now.
Okay, thank you. Jessica.
I also echo the sentiment that it's like, especially for us here, right? We know that migration isn't anything new. We are safe. We have been safe. We are trying to prosper and thrive here along the border, and we wouldn't be doing so unless we felt safe. And I mean, as someone who has lived on, my family has lived on the border for generations, like that hasn't changed. I think what we really do need to focus on, I mean, especially when we were talking about a border wall and like all this stuff, is the fact that especially after the draconian laws that were implemented by the Trump administration, it perversely incentivizes people to try to come seek safety in our country outside of our ports of entry. So instead of doing the right thing, if we're actually trying to address, for example, human smuggling and all of the other crimes that people are trying to bring up when talking about how unsafe the border is, we actually need to focus on streamlining our asylum process so that we don't have, we don't let credence to this chaos that apparently so-called is happening here along the border.
You guys must have been listening to my mayor's speeches when I was mayor, I think, a little bit. Okay, well, speaking of border wall, Jessica, do you favor or oppose the wall and why?
I oppose the border wall. I mean, especially to know that there's all this public money that is being thrown down the drain to try to build this symbol of hatred, of building what essentially would mean a rupture in like the beautiful bicultural area of the country that we live in. As someone who like lived their life being, raised in between Laredo and Laredo, we can't spend our hard-earned, tax money that we're paying to our government to invest in us in this symbol of hatred. I'd rather see investments in our education. I'd rather see investments in healthcare. I'd rather see investments in good paying jobs. And that's what we should be focusing on.
Okay, Tanya, do you favor or oppose the border wall and why?
I think you can see it in my background. I opposed the border wall. I organized against the border wall and helped co-lead the effort, not only here in Laredo, Texas, but nationwide. We had a coalition of 12 cities, over 50 organizations that in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic, when we were feeling abandoned and we were feeling ignored as border communities so often do, we took a stance and we said, these millions and billions of dollars that you are trying to throw at us for a complex problems do not have simple solutions. And we don't do ourselves any service in trying to deny that fact. And so we actually quantified what each mile of wall would give us in our communities. And so the Fund Our Future was not just a slogan for us. It was something that we deeply and wholeheartedly felt that we could be getting some of the life-saving medicines, some of the access to medical infrastructure, and supporting our teachers in the classroom and our families who were dealing with remote learning. It was a very personal fight because we were seeing the effects and what that meant, that we were being thrown money for this one thing, but that we didn't have value in other regards.
Okay, well, you both answered the next two questions that had to do with border security, so we're going to skip to USMCA. Those of us living on the border understand firsthand how the USMCA links the US and Mexican economies, and with Mexico being the US top trading partner. It was also reported by the National Association of Manufacturers that more than 4,100 Texas manufacturers exported a combined 125 billion in goods to Mexico and Canada each year. So the first question, Tanya, did you or do you support USMCA, and why or why not?
Listen, our Laredo is the #1 port of entry, and that is something to be proud of. But what I have to name as well is that I do beg the question of what does that leave for the typical worker? How do we as a typical Laredoan or South Texan benefit from this trade agreement? Because what it also allows for is the exploitation of cheap labor. And that is something that we need to face head on. And not only that, but that cheap labor is just across the border, are jobs that are not coming into our communities, and that these corporations are really getting to reap the benefits. So when it comes to trade, it is a very vital, important part of our economy. I am proud that Laredo is the #1 port of land, but I think we have a lot of ways to go to ensure that we are protecting workers and that we are ensuring that it is not just corporations and C-suites and entrepreneurs that get to benefit off of it.
Okay, Jessica?
Yes, I was talking about the USMCA during our last election because although, I mean, trade is so important. I am the daughter of a trailero. Like my dad has been driving for over 20 years, and trade is really important for, you know, the economic well-being of my household. What I don't like about a lot of trade agreements and a lot of negotiations is the fact that people like my dad fall through the cracks. They aren't the ones that usually benefit from many of the first drafts of trade proposals that are thrown around. And it's because we want to make sure that, you know, the jobs that are created are jobs that are going to be created here, that they're good paying union jobs, and that jobs aren't going to get outsourced. And that's something that's so important for border communities, because we don't want our jobs to be exported elsewhere, so that other folks can benefit at the top of the corporate ladder, but our workers are being thrown under the bus and their job is being exported elsewhere.
Okay. And then Jessica, what can we do to assure that we're ready for an increase in trade, both at our southern and northern borders?
Can you repeat the question? It broke off a
Yeah.
little.
What can we do to assure that we are ready for this increase in trade, both at our southern and northern borders?
Oh, that one's an easy one. You can just talk to a lot of truck drivers like my dad, and I've been hearing it a lot. It's because, you know, most of the holdup at our borders tends to be the fact that we don't have a lot of personnel or a lot of tools that help with screening a lot of the trade that is coming through the port of entry. So we need to make sure, if we're talking about how we can benefit our trade ports, is having the infrastructure to rapidize all of that, make it faster, to make sure that people, you know, as soon as they're coming in, as these truck drivers or trains are coming in with goods, to process them out of Laredo or the ports of entry, McAllen, other places along the border as soon as possible, to avoid the holdups on goods on the border.
Okay. Tanya, same question.
Well, first of all, I think that, you know, if we were to have this expediting, this increase in trade, it would be obviously really exciting for our communities to have more jobs be available. One thing that I think we would need to be, again, wary of and make sure that we were able to implement was the PRO Act, so that we can protect the right to organize in these workplaces. My father is a security guard, and so he oftentimes has to deal, you know, with just lack of living wages, and was having his job threatened and jeopardized when he organized with his workers not too long ago to get an increase from $725 to $850. Now they finally were able to get that increase, but how much easier would it have been if we had the PRO Act passed? And I think that once you have that, then the floodgates are open for what the potential opportunities are in our communities to have more jobs that are paying fair wages, that are protected, and that we are not, again, exploiting our workers that are having to deal with the expansion in trade.
Okay, thank you. The next subject is gun control. You know, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but we know you read in the paper daily of gun use of firearms for a lot of different things. So I'll just cut to the chase. The question, and this is for Tanya first, do you support universal background checks for gun purchases? Why or why not?
Absolutely. We are living in a very, I don't even have the words for the ways that teachers are being challenged in the classroom right now. And as a former teacher myself, having those memories of having to go through, you know, these exercises at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, you know, we had to meet this quota of when we were preparing for a potential active shooter in our classrooms. If we would be focusing more on how to protect students from being victims of gun violence, versus right now we're very just bogged down on whether schools can have masks or not. That argument and that parallel just is so telling of the times that we're living in. And universal background checks only ensures that when folks have guns, because we are a gun loving and gun owning state and country, that they have the mental capacity to be able to have that gun and use it responsibly.
Okay, Jessica, your answer, please.
Yes, I also, I mean, wholeheartedly support the idea of having universal background checks. I know that, running in a district, one of the lines that we had last time around, we had, mass shootings in our district. And, just thinking about what something as simple as a background check could have done to avoid, doing what we can to deter a lot of these weapons making into the hands of the wrong people, and how many lives, could be preserved because of that. The United States has a disproportionate amount of mass shootings compared to other countries in the world. And it's not just happenstance. It has to do with a lot with policy, and we need to get smart and implement a lot of these common sense approaches that I know are bipartisan, especially something as universal background checks are.
Okay. Jessica, next question relates to strengthening gun laws. Do you think this should be a federal or a state area when it relates to gun laws?
I think it has to be a creative approach, and even at the local and municipal level, because obviously there are different uses for different guns depending on where you are. Obviously in Texas, you can't expect, the same kinds of gun laws. And I don't mean that like in terms of politics, but I mean that in terms of uses and like actual like uses for a weapon. You can't expect that in rural Texas are going to be the same kinds of laws as you would expect somewhere as in New York City, of course. So I think it actually is, the answer is not just those two, as in state and federal, but I actually think municipal, since we know that obviously San Antonio isn't the same as like if you're out there in La Grulla or something. So I think it has to be a comprehensive approach, not exclusive to one or the other.
Okay. Tanya?
I agree that there has to be certain measures that are coming from the federal side of government. And, when you take it state by state, I mean, the fact that it's just so much easier to purchase a gun in Texas compared to other states, say California or Connecticut, it's concerning for sure, right? And we all know that down in Texas, we like to use guns for recreational purposes, and that is great. I mean, I take part in that. I'm not going to lie. I think a lot of us down here have families that own ranches, and it's an activity that we like to engage on in the weekends. But it's very different than to just have like a free for all when it comes to state by state. So those federal measures that can be implemented at the state level, I think would provide the best balance to ensure that our communities are safe, and that we don't find, laws like we saw in the last Texas legislature session passed, where the access to a gun is, it's like ordering, something off of Amazon or eBay.
Okay. Now we'll go to an easier subject, COVID-19. Just when we thought we were starting to see the end of the tunnel, we have a new variant of it, Omicron. And I don't know about Laredo, but in the Valley, the deaths don't continue to go down, and hospitalizations are neither. So the first question is, and I think it's Jessica's question. No, yes. What is your position on masks and vaccination? Should they be required under any circumstances? And that's Tanya's question, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Not an easier subject, Jim, but today it came out that Laredo had a surge of 17,000 cases in the last 2 weeks. I think I have known more people now that have had COVID than at any point of the pandemic, myself included a couple of weeks ago. And I think that when it comes to masks and vaccines, we need to do our part. We need to do what we can to protect those around us. And trusting the science is at the root of it. We have trusted the science during the Spanish flu. We trusted the science in ending polio. And we can trust the science this time around as well. I think that when it comes to mask mandates and vaccine mandates, what we have seen is this issue has become highly politicized. But for me, it's not a political issue. It's an issue of life or death, and it's an issue of protecting our communities and doing what we can to safeguard each other in the places that we work and live in.
Okay. Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I think here the first, big issue that we had in terms of addressing COVID was the politicization of it, right? The fact that all of a sudden it became a red and blue issue, and that shouldn't have been the issue to begin with, because I think that led to like so many people in South Texas dying. And it was so hurtful to like not even be, especially in a time that you were so isolated from everyone, since you really can't, couldn't even hang out with people as you normally do to try to get through a stressful situation. It was even more isolating and painful to like even open up Facebook and see, so and so's family member passed away, or loved one or a relative or a friend passing away. And I just think about how much we need to do to encourage and educate folks, because we cannot continue having this pain and suffering that our community is still going through. And especially in areas like South Texas, where we don't have the appropriate medical infrastructure to deal with COVID surges, I think is just so important. So obviously, in terms of familia being one of our values, making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect ourselves and our community is very important.
Okay, Jessica. Now, the president's tried to do some things relating to the COVID virus, and he's been blocked in court because he didn't have the authority. It really should be up to Congress to do some of the things that he wanted to do. As a congressperson, would you be in favor of Congress doing some implementation of limitations of businesses and individuals as it relates to COVID protection?
I mean, I think it really, in terms of trying to get through and like the welfare of our community, doing everything we can to protect ourselves. Obviously, the more we protect ourselves in terms of, mandating mask use, especially since it's such a low effort thing to do that could protect so many people. I think we should absolutely, try to implement it. And if an act of Congress is something that's going to get us there, I am wholeheartedly going to support that, because I'm really tired of, the pain and suffering that we've seen in our community. So that's what's going to drive, my vote, is making sure that my community is safe. So if an act of Congress is something that can be the legislative fix for this, then I'm going to do everything possible to make sure that we can implement it.
Okay, thank you. Tanya?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I think that, the one thing that I do want to name with this situation is that historically, we have seen Black and Brown communities have higher levels of distrust, maybe when it comes to specific medical, vaccines and different kinds of treatments and proposed ideas, right? So we need to do the legwork to be able to educate our communities so that they can feel safe and that they know that they can trust the science, right? But I treat this issue no differently than a meningitis vaccine so that you can go to college, right? Which we all have to get. Again, a polio vaccine, a flu vaccine. So it is a very tricky subject when you take into account the historical context, right? That we have seen Black and Brown communities be exploited in the past for the sake of medical developments. But we need to, at this point in time, trust that the science is there and that it is going to make us all better for it.
Okay. Now, when people say that the success of a congressperson is how much bacon he brings back to the district. And so earmarks, which were appropriated funds for specific projects in members' districts, were very popular until they were supposedly done away with in 2011. Some would agree that the moratorium on earmarks didn't really do away with it, but only made because of transparency. Do you support specific federal earmarks? Why or why not?
And that's for me, correct?
Yes.
This is a topic where, our incumbent is sitting in the appropriations subcommittee. And I know that we all have this potential thought in our minds, right? That we want money for our communities. We want money appropriated to bring some of these projects, right? And not even just projects, but like things that we actually need. Like in Atascosa, they have been able to get community health clinics because of this work. And we are grateful for it. And we want to see more of it. And we also want to make sure that when we are appropriating money or earmarking money, that it is not standing to benefit the special corporate interests that some for example, contractors have, right? And that we are not just using it for the sake of returning the favor, right? We don't want to encourage more quid pro quo. We know that that exists in our current government, and it doesn't seek to benefit our communities. And so in that regard, we would have to make sure that the federal earmarks are standing to benefit our people first and not campaign contributors.
Okay, Jessica?
Yeah, that one's an easy one to answer because my top line priority when I get to Congress is going to be fighting for investment for our community, earmarked or no earmarks. My number one priority is going to be making sure that we have access to healthcare, making sure that we have good infrastructure, making sure that we're creating jobs in our district. When I go out there and I knock on doors, people aren't asking me if that investment's going to have an earmark or no earmark. And I think it's also really important to talk to folks and say, like, for example, I've taken a pledge that I'm taking zero corporate PAC money. So like no corrupting influence from corporations is going to have a bearing on my vote. So folks are going to know right off the bat that whatever kind of investment I'm fighting for in Washington is going to be something that directly benefits them. So for me, I mean, I think they're just going to be wondering, like, is Congresswoman Cisneros delivering for the district, yes or no? And I want them to make sure that they know every time that they can answer yes, again, regardless of earmarks or no earmarks.
Okay. I'm just making this one question up. You know, in the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years, we've got more publicity on the border than we ever had in probably the last 50 years. And much of it's been centered on immigration, with Democrats taking one position, going home and telling what their constituents think, and the other one's going, but not really dealing with border issues. One of the main border issues we have is that we have one river system that comes out of Mexico that is the water for almost 3 million people on our side, including a great part of your districts. How do you go back to Washington and convince the Washingtonites, the people in Congress, that border issues are very important and should be addressed more than they are normally or have been in the past, except for immigration?
I mean, I think it's important to bring down people to the community, you know, folks in Washington, and like have a different lens of, you're not just here to look at immigration issues. Like, this is a community that I think a lot of people pit into like a pigeonhole, right? Into saying like, this is an area of the country that we have to deal with just in terms of immigration, but they don't take a look at the community that is permanently living here, right? That we are more than just a gateway for, you know, migrants coming into the United States, although an important function, but there are people who are permanently living here. And we, during my past work as an immigration attorney for a nonprofit, we did have members of Congress come down to Laredo, Texas, and we're able to show them how much more our community has to offer. So they have this comprehensive lens of, we're not a problem child or something you have to deal with, but we're in a community that deserves investment beyond just what, you know, people think that you have to invest in terms of border security along the border.
Okay, Tanya.
This is a point of contention that we did bring up a lot in our fight against the border wall. When it comes to the border, the wall's not the border. The river is really important, but it's also not the border. The border is us, the people that live and thrive and are just trying to sometimes make ends meet, but really just want to provide and safeguard their future for future generations. Part of that is acknowledging the fact that as it stands, the Rio Grande River is at risk of drying up by 2040. And that very soon we will have to figure out how to give it the attention and honestly just the regard that it deserves, because all this time that we were spending trying to figure out how to put up a border wall, we should have been investing in our river, which is our source of water and our source of life. One thing that I would do in Congress is I would push for repealing the DHS waiver that comes with the Real ID Act. It has allowed for many laws to go unaccounted for at the border, including the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act.
Okay. Let's talk about healthcare. The Rio Grande Valley, and I think probably South Texas generally, is one of the most medically underserved regions in the state and the country. As federally elected officials, what will you do and what your role would be in ensuring that our residents have access to affordable and equitable healthcare? Tanya, you're first.
Thank you. So we know that between the ages of 18 and 65, we have nearly 1/3 of the population that goes uninsured. Myself counted, and up until very recently, my family counted. My family was able to get the Affordable Care Act, get insured through there, but there was so much means testing that stood in the way of them and actually being able to accomplish it. And there's such a thing as being too poor to be able to benefit from the Affordable Care Act. So we need to acknowledge that our system as it stands is not ensuring people the way that it can. We need to find a pathway to single payer healthcare and do whatever we can right now, like lowering the age of eligibility for Medicare so that we can cover more people and benefit them. And secondly, we need to address the problem of medical infrastructure, especially being a community that is largely rural in Texas 28. We need to make sure that we're not making people drive every which way 30 to 40 minutes to get the critical care that they need, or be airlifted out of their city so that they can stand between the meaning of life or death.
Okay. Jessica.
Yeah, so one of the big reasons why I decided to run for Congress in the first place was to expand healthcare, because like so many people in our district, I lost a loved one because we couldn't afford her care. I was 13-year-old selling plates of food on the side of the highway to try to fundraise. And I know that story is so common for so many people here, because every Saturday you can just walk out and you'll see people trying to do the same thing. Or as we also did after, trying to raise for their funeral expenses by trying to sell raffle tickets and those plates. We deserve more than that. We deserve health insurance. We need to make sure that we're investing and recognizing that healthcare is a human right, and that we don't have to go to Mexico to go get life-saving care, that we need to stop going over there to get, cheaper medications or things like insulin or whatever kind of treatment you may need, because we're one of the richest countries in the world. And when we, pay taxes and invest our money, we want that public money to be used for us. So for me, that's been, an issue that we've been running on across the entire district, because no matter where you are, healthcare is the number one issue.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Let's talk about the internet. That seems to be a big issue. Now, COVID shed another giant spotlight on the need to reach the last mile in broadband for service to everybody, especially high-speed access. And years ago, we did it through the Rural Water Supply Corporations, did it for water, and the World Electrical Co-ops did it for electricity. Is it now time for the federal government act to make sure that broadband is available to everyone? Oh, I think, Jessica, you're first.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? It broke off. And
okay. Yeah, COVID's another area where we're underserved, especially in rural areas, and also in inner cities where you don't have normal cable TV, et cetera. The federal government responded to the need for water and sewer by creation of rural water supply corporations, rural electricity corporations. Should an effort like that be reinstated to make sure that broadband gets serviced in many areas?
Absolutely. And I think it's ironic, the fact that I couldn't hear you on this question, because yes, we absolutely need to invest in broadband. I mean, especially in areas like, for example, Laredo. Laredo isn't a small town. It's a town of 300,000 people. And, if the internet is so bad here, I can only imagine what it's like. I know what it's like. We've been out there trying to knock on doors using our internet database to try to reach voters, and it's just terrible out there. So whatever we can do to invest in broadband, making sure that we are connecting, folks, especially from the rural parts of our district, to the internet is important. And I think what I also like about this proposal is that it will create jobs. So making sure that they're well paid and union jobs, I think it's just a plus.
Okay. Tanya?
Yes, in my work as an organizer with Leadership for Educational Equity, I was able to help strategize around our campaign for the digital divide. And we know that it exists in urban areas, but even more so affects rural communities. And from the time that I have been able to spend on the ground, a lot of the conversation centers around this, and the concern that we have had be even more prevalent during the COVID-19 pandemic, with not just virtual work, but virtual and remote schooling, that really access to internet has become part of our critical infrastructure, right? So helping us redefine what we see as infrastructure And now that we have been through an episode of point in time, such as the pandemic, that we can push the FCC to be able to higher up the speeds of internet, that we are also able to help the problem of monopolizing internet companies and how that sort of discourages any improvements that we could see in terms of speeds and in terms of costs and in terms of where broadband is available.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, you asked me to tell you it's time for the closing.
It's time for the closing. So y'all have 1 minute, right? Is that right?
Yes.
To sum it up. And I think Tanya,
No, Jessica needs to go first.
Jessica goes first. Jessica, you have a minute to sum up all you said the last hour.
Thank you. I mean, I think, well, the good thing is that all of this is recorded, so you can just go back if anybody needs a refresher for any of my stances. But I just wanted to say thank you. If you made it all the way to this part of the video, thank you so much for trying to be an informed voter. The summary of my campaign is this: just making sure that we are running on bold progressive policy that is actually going to meet the struggles that everyday South Texans face, whether that be investment in healthcare, whether that be investment in good paying jobs, investment in education, investment in our climate and our environment, in good drinking water, all of those things. Those are what we're trying to run on and make sure that we actually get addressed. Our whole campaign, our ethos is basically going out there and meeting voters where they are. So thank you so much. You know what's at stake with this election if you've made it all the way to this part of our forum today. And I just want to say thank you for being civically engaged, and thank you to Futuro RGV for this opportunity to talk about our policy positions, which is very important, especially since we are 14 days out from the start of the election. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Tanya, your turn.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Futuro RGV. Thank you, Nedra. I wish that we were able to have more time so that voters could hear all about our policy platforms, even in more detail. But I will end by saying this. If you believe that our communities deserve a leader that is unbossed, unbought, and unafraid, then I humbly ask for your support starting on February 14th, early voting ending February 25th, and on election day on March 1st. It is time for a Congresswoman, the first ever in Texas 28, to bring practical solutions that meet the needs of our people, because for too long, they have gone neglected and unmet. But my vision for Texas 28 is brave, and I will have the political will to make things happen, like cancellation of student debt, legalization and decriminalization of marijuana, and last but not least, to ensure that we are able to protect our workers' rights, whether it means for the next pandemic or a transition and expansion of clean energy. We have been running a grassroots campaign that is only accountable to the people in our district, and I cannot wait to go to Congress and be your next Congresswoman. Thank you.
Well, okay, well, thank you, ladies. And I appreciate how difficult it is to give 1 minute answers to questions, and you did a great job. So congratulations. And all you voters out there, thank you for listening.
Well, I want to thank the candidates. I want to thank you, Jim, our tech staff, our timekeeper, Albert. But I especially want to thank all of you people who are watching and trying to be informed, learn about the candidates that are running for U.S. House District 28. We're Futuro's hosting a number of these forums, both Republican and Democrat, and you can watch them on Futuro's Facebook page up until Election Day. But now I want to say to you out there watching, if you're an American, if you care about our democracy, then we need your help. Help our country, our state, and here at home. Get informed about these candidates, their positions, and find out why they want to serve you. They're not all the same. They have different ideas. They have different perspectives on how to solve problems. You need to learn about them. You can learn about them on our Facebook page, listening to these forums. You can learn about them on the League of Women Voters, Vote for 11, but learn about them and then vote. If you learn about them and don't vote, you're throwing it away. Be sure you vote. Then hold them accountable. You have a responsibility to educate yourself if our democracy is to survive. It's up to you and me and all of us who care about the government that works for all of us. So early voting is February the 14th through the 25th. Election day is March 1. And then the Futura RGV message is be an informed voter. Exercise your duty, exercise your right, and exercise your privilege to vote to keep a strong Hidalgo County, a strong democracy, and a strong country. So thank you and good night.